KP's Diablo 4 KPIs. This is an important thing. We're going to be showing off the calculator, and we've got an interesting build here. You just saw Lucky Luciano earlier today. He's been blitzing with the rogue. This is the rogue that he put together. It's actually a phenomenal force to be reckoned with. So he rotates a skill build involving a lot of poison here with the double trap, as well as the twisted blades at the core and heart of it. He's also been utilizing combo points, a big difference compared to previous builds that tended to rely on inner sights. And he's been buffing his damage up with a lot of different things in here, as well as a bunch of damage mitigation tools such as Aspect of Might and Mangler's Aspect to give him that survivability. Now, I looked over this build and I was impressed, and we talked a little bit about why most people are running poison on their rogues at the moment. With the buffs to HP pools, it seems viable to go for dots because enemies are lasting longer, which means your DPS output is worthwhile. And yeah, well, Lucky is onto something that is a reasonable assumption. But I have a counter argument here, and I've been working on this. We're going to take Lucky's build, which is a good build, and we're going to break it. I'm going to try to see if I can do better than the coach. And you guys are going to actually see these numbers change to kind of give you an indication. Now, to make it fair, to make sure that we're getting more or less what's going to come out from each of these builds, we're going to enable certain configurations on the enemies, effects that would appear quite reasonably and regularly. Vulnerable, of course, is an obvious one that a rogue should always be capable of. Check out that effective DPS increase that you'd have as a level 100 character with optimal gear. Now, another one that's usually going to happen is chilled, because you have to remember that Penitent Greaves is quite a meta choice for rogues. That's going to give you that as a configuration, because remember, it's going to put an ice path behind you that applies chilled. Poison is, of course, going to be in there because he's all about that poison. He's such a lovely person on camera, but toxic with the build. And then slow tends to come in, especially because your basic skill puncture, giving the ability to apply a slow whenever you crit strike, which you should be doing fairly frequently as a rogue. So, how am I going to break his build? Well, this is where it gets interesting. Break, no. Maybe optimize, there's an argument. I think there's a different way to go for leveling. I think this build for him is actually great for when you get to harder bosses and Uber content later on, because that is where stacking poison gets insurmountable value compared to the build that I'm going to do. But from a leveling perspective, there's actually, well, I'd argue maybe a more optimal way, or a different way at least, to go. So first of all, he does go for the exposure here. We're not going to want to exposure the build I'm going to do, because these are trapper builds. I'm going for a Twisted Blades imbuement build. What you're seeing from Lucky here is imbuement plus traps. So we're going to remove the exposure. We're also going to take away the death trap, because I just said, I ain't no trapper, all right? But on top of that, we are at least going to keep the trap mastery to give us the crit strike increase chance with the poison. We're then going to get rid of all of our levels of poison imbuement here. We do not need this. Debilitating toxins as well, because that's there simply to mitigate more damage, but we're going to compensate for that with the way that we do our builds. And this should be more or less everything we want to change. The big things that we're now going to add in is cold imbuement. Cold imbuement was seen as a meme, something to laugh at for a lot of people. In fact, to make sure that we have consistency here, I'm going to open up a second tab with Lucky's build so that we'll have a direct one-to-one comparison as we go. But cold imbuement kind of got a bad rap. But the cool thing about cold imbuement is there's ways that it can buff your damage. But on top of that, another cool thing that cold imbuement really offers up is this ability to crowd control, to mitigate damage that be coming your way because you're freezing or chilling targets. So this is Lucky's build. We're going to put these numbers back on so you can see the comparative. He's hitting for about 10.5 million. That's a big boy, a big bad boy, right? He could be a raid boss himself. We've already put ourselves down to 6.8. But now we're going to go into this ice route. We're going to go down to mixed cold imbuement, which is going to buff our damage by 20% to crowd controlled enemies. That means whether they're chilled, slowed, whatever, they're going to be affected by this. And if they ever get frozen, that gets doubled. We're then going to take 3 points into Fridge and Finesse, which is going to give us an increase of 5% per level to chilled enemies and doubling that on freeze. We're then also going to add in Shadow Imbuement, because Shadow Imbuement is going to give us a little bit of extra control on the mobs as we play throughout. And we're going to go down to get that crit strike chance increase on injured enemies, as well as applying vulnerable explosions. Now, one big change here, you're already seeing these numbers kind of look poop on a stick. Bear with me. We're going to switch in cold imbuement, which we need to do. Oh, what are you doing, KP? That number, it's getting uglier. I want to spit on it. What else are you going to do here? Well, we're going to get rid of Death Trap. We don't need that anymore. 6.1 million. KP, you're ruining this build. Lucky's got the better one. There's no way this improves. It's going to improve. Check out what we do here. So we're going to come back in, and this is the big bad boy. Remember I said late game content, poison stacking is worthwhile, but at this stage in the game, you just want to plow on through dungeons as quickly as possible. What's better for that? Explosions, baby. More than you'll find in a Michael Bay movie. We take Victimize here, and we bump our effective DPS and AoE DPS up to 13.3 million.
Super raid boss. I can't stop smiling over here because this is such an impressive tool to be able to simulate all of your damage and everything. I know we don't have a damage calculator or a DPS meter or anything like that here in Diablo yet. I'm sure it'll come in the future, but this is the next best thing that you're going to get, which means it's the best thing you can possibly use. This is the best tool on the internet to use to figure out what you can possibly do or come up with.
This
can't.
is fascinating.
The number goes higher.
Oh Lord, carry on.
Oh wait, there's more, right? We've still got 2
no.
points to work with, but we're gonna get refunded 1 because we're gonna take Siphoning Strike down to level 2. This is adaptable depending on survivability, but we're making up survivability elsewhere. We're gonna take Dark Shroud, which is gonna give you damage mitigation per shroud around you, going up from 4% per up to a total of 20% if you have 5 active. And for each Dark Shroud active, I'm going to get 4% movement speed, which is going to buff up your clear rate as you move through these dungeons. This hasn't done anything for my effective DPS yet. I'm going to assign it on the bar, right? No. We're going to make some slight adaptations to what we've seen here from Lucky. One thing is I noticed he went for Aspect of Retribution, and you can see what this does is it gives an 8% chance to stun enemies, which would increase his survivability, right? Less things are attacking at you. We're going to fix that elsewhere because we've got the shrouds now. So what we can do instead is we can actually go in and get our hands on the rapid aspect. This buffs our basic skill attack speed. That's going to allow us to rotate through 3-point combos of Twisted Blades much quicker and effectively get those puncture crits out much faster. So we do that. We're already now buffed up to 14.1 million damage. It's busting. We're going big, but I'm not done there. No. Blade Dancers need to be switched out. Blade Dancers, why am I doing that? That's a critical skill. For those that
Blade
don't know,
Dancer.
It's the most critical thing, right? If you're doing Twisted Blades, this is the one that gives you that orbiting effect and the linger effect before they pull back. We're purging this. We're getting rid of this off of the pendant. We're going to replace this with one of my favorite. It's called the Special 7th skill, Umbrous Aspect. This unlucky hit with crit strikes gives you a chance to generate Dark Shrouds for free. This is a cool little trick. It is going to hit my damage down to 11.2 million. Right now you're going, he knows nothing. We don't want to hear more. No, but hear me out. I now effectively have a 7th skill on my bar without it being there because Dark Shrouds are being generated elsewhere. We can now replace the aspect of corruption because potency only really is valuable on poison builds. We're now more about that ice and that shadow, so we don't benefit from the potency as much. Instead, we can now stick the Blade Dancers on our bow. So we now get that damage all back while now getting the 7th skill with Umbrous. Pretty sexy, right? And the final change would be, compared to Lucky's build, he had 4 ranks of poison imbuement. You just replace these with the shadow imbuement. I would never go ice imbuement because ice simply increases the chill proc. It doesn't do a damage change, whereas shadow imbuement levels will directly impact the damage that you do on explosion. But after you've done all these changes from what Lucky's running right now, we're less Trapper. We've still got Poison Trap in there, but that's mainly to reset our poisons and also give additional slow effects. But we are now up to 14.2 million almost damage compared to the 10.5 that you would get on Lucky's build. And if you're worried that this slow is biased because the only way we can actually proc slow right now is our basic skill puncture, don't worry, I've got you covered. An alternative route you can go here, you can sacrifice a point or 2 in shadow imbuement, and if you don't care about that movement speed that much on Dark Shroud, take that away. And then instead you can come in and level dash. In fact, you can potentially even get rid of this Dark Shroud, Shadow rather entirely. You can replace Shadow or Poison with Dash, and what that'll do is that'll give you the slow when you burst through people to make sure you're getting the damage amplification with all the other slow modifiers. Either way, you're going to get to the 14 million effective DPS level 100. I personally would advise sticking with the Dark Shroud plus Shadow Imbuement. It will give you more burst, and it will give you that oomph you need to plow through that level 50 to 100 grind.
Whoa. Dude, what do you think, Cool Noodle?
What can we even add to that, man? Like, what are we even doing in this situation?
Pop off, King. Good Lord.
Jesus Christ, bro.
One more detail, by the way, because I know there's going to be callouts about Victimize being a dirty skill and maybe not as reliable late game. If you go for close quarters combat, it's going to put you a little bit lower than where you are with the Lucky build. But there's a little bit of fluidity there that you can account for by switching around the Shadow Imbuement skills, that you'll still see a bump up in damage. But ultimately, my advice is Victimize, because this build, that Lucky's build, has a 41% chance to Lucky hit. And that's how Victimize works. It's on Lucky hits to apply that vulnerable explosion. So you're going to be explode on your way through content. This is the build you want to do, guys.
What I'm hearing is I think next season, KP, you should be ranking to level 100 in the world first with the same build.
I mean, if they don't nerf it, maybe. I can't take full credit. Lucky had a good baseline here, and I looked for a pivot to go. I want to reiterate, by the way, Lucky is a genius. This build that he's done is tried and proven and incredible in the late game. My argument is more around, would it have been more effective to have this burst clear compared to the dots? Because what we've seen from the likes of Lagoon, especially in the Sorcerer group, is if you have enough damage to kill things straight away, dots don't make any sense. You should be able to just kill and move on. And that's the goal of this build we made here. From a leveling perspective, you want to touch something and it should just die.